Hi everybody. Most of the people are getting their lunches and have filtered their way back in. We have at least the session that I'm extremely excited about and interested to hear some of the comments and anecdotes from an amazing group of leaders. One of the areas that has continued to interest me more and more throughout my career is this concept of leadership and the theory behind it, the science behind it, the application of it. And it's certainly something that develops over time. I think maybe some people are skilled a little bit more in certain areas than others, but it definitely is a skill that you can develop over time. And if you're conscientious of it and you're attuned to some of the areas that are both your strengths and weaknesses, you can continue to improve on a continual basis, and that's something that is super exciting. Prior to inviting up this illustrious group, I have them here, Dr. Bray, Dr. Schmidt, Dr. Layton, Dr. Olson, Dr. McKee, and the years that they were presidents of the OTA. The OTA had its 40th anniversary this year, and it was fun. They had a very similar presidential panel that was discussing some of the experiences that some of these leaders had had over time, and it was fun. So you all might just want to jot down what you think your definition of leadership is. I have developed a leadership course that we've been given in Latin America. We gave one in Colombia with Dr. Quintero as our host last month, and this is one of the questions I usually start with, and it's interesting. People often have common themes but very different answers for what this is. So if you read what leadership is in the dictionary, it's the office or position of a leader, the capacity to lead, the act or instance of leading. It's very matter of fact. But when you start talking to some of the experts in this area, this is Peter Drucker, who's he's an Austrian-American author and sociologist, and he was largely credited with being the father of the development of the science of management. And his definition of leadership is the only definition of a leader is someone who has followers. And that's certainly critical, is being able to have a group behind you, because a single person on their own isn't necessarily a leader, and if they're trying to do something innovative, it turns them from being a leader into being a little bit of a nut. But Warren Bennis, who is largely credited for the science of leadership, modern day study of it, said that leadership is the capacity to translate vision into reality. And I'll get to that in a second. I think this is a little closer to the definition that I have of leadership. Bill Gates said, as we look ahead in the next century, leaders will be those who empower others. So the concept of moving a team forward. John Maxwell, who is another leadership theorist, said that leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. And I'll mention a little bit about what's the difference between a leader and a manager here in a second. I've taken 4 different leadership courses, and I've helped design leadership courses for the American Orthopedic Association, both at the Kellogg School of Management and the USC School of Business. I've also worked on leadership development work here at UCSF. And what struck me as being a good definition of leadership is that leadership is enacting change that would otherwise not have happened. And why do I say this? There's this concept called default theory, or default future. And what it is if you don't do anything, what is going to happen? So it answers the question that what's likely to occur if nothing unexpected comes along, nothing disruptive comes along. You have to notice the default future drives your actions in a way that requires zero thought, and that every single group has this default future, that if you don't do anything, something's going to happen. And it's often felt at a gut level, but it frequently isn't discussed. Like, what are we going to do if we do nothing? And there's, in contrast, there's this concept of an invented future, whereas the default future is what will happen if nothing happens, if you don't do anything. An inventive future is what will happen regardless, what will we make happen regardless of what comes along. So this is truly enacting a directional change and going in a different place. and it's replacing the default future. And so here's an example of some of the California fires. This is a picture of Sonoma burning. You know, we had our problems in Southern California. Canada just had their fires. And if you don't do anything here, what's going to happen? And the answer is nothing good. So the actions that we have toward an invented future are those that steer us away from a default future and lead us towards another direction. Now, this direction isn't necessarily good. Leaders doing and making change aren't necessarily good leaders. They may be making change towards bad directions, but they may be effective leaders. And this is something that we all have to take into account as we're following our different leaders. This is something that comes up all the time. What are the differences between managers and leaders? Managers have something that they inherit, that they move along. Leaders have things that they create. So while managers count value, leaders create value. Managers live in circles of influence, and they can, because of their positions, they can get people to behave and work in certain ways, whereas leaders have circles of power which oversee a lot of these decisions that are influencing other people. So managers also manage the work that's present, and leaders lead people. And there's an article here by Nair for your reference if you'd like. It's really good in the Harvard School Business Review. We all have struggles with leadership. This is a list of struggles that were very common amongst AOA attendees at the course that we had at Kellogg. Most of these were chair people, and you can see there were some very common ones, and there'll be some that are a little one-offs, but affecting change, managing growth, gaining engagement, having time management, motivating staff, responsibilities, providing feedback, delegation, and then there's a whole host of other things that we have to deal with on a daily basis that came up as important issues, from physician wellness to dealing with team members that have left the team. So the questions are really which characteristics are most important in a leader. We'll be asking as first question to our panel what they think are really critical areas of leadership and characteristics. This also came from the AOA. It's a whole host of different areas that encompass good qualities in people, and in people that you'd like to follow, and people that encourage those to follow in certain directions. When they posed a question, this is another study that was on the Harvard Business Review, they looked at longitudinally over some of the qualities that were important for leadership over different periods of time. And so in 1987, 95, and 02, they sampled a variety of companies and leaders in companies. Then they asked what are the most important qualities, and the ones that consistently came up across all of these surveys were honesty, competency, forward-looking, and inspirational. Being truthful, ethical, principled, having the ability to look forward, to present some sort of direction to the people they're trying to work with, having competence at what you do, a track record of getting things done, and inspiring other people to do things that you'd like them to do. People make decisions based on emotions. They don't make decisions based on information, even though many of them need information to be able to move in a certain direction. So at this point, I would like to invite our panelists up, and I have some questions. So if you could all come on up. Might have to share one microphone. And then we can also certainly take questions from the audience. So during the course of this panel discussion, which I'll find extremely interesting, if there's somebody in the audience that has a burning question or even better, provocative one, please go ahead and do that. So I'll start from Andy and work my way over on the first question. So Andy, what do you think are important leadership qualities? You've led, you've followed What's your opinion? What struck you as being effective?
I agree with what you've already said as being really important, whether I thought about that in advance or not. And so what you presented didn't surprise me, but what I found valuable and tried to emulate is the concept of sort of leading by example. So, for example, if you're being told to check into the OR a certain time before surgery, be in clinic on time, if your department chair, if your senior partners are getting away without doing that, it just isn't very, very credible. So I think that's really important, is you have to truly lead and be at the front and do the things you expect others to do. Honesty and fairness and being open-minded, I think, is very important, and I think you really need to be aware of your own tendencies. At our hospital, we all take this insights test where you kind of learn your color, what your personality is normally, but also what happens when you're stressed, because you may come out really strong, and so being able to, if you have that tendency, to recognize that and avoid it. But I think it's really important, I think Tim made a lot of great points in his talk earlier. The cat and, listen and see, but keep your mouth closed, I think is really important.
That's Dr. Seuss, I think, actually.
So those are things that I've learned. There's a lot of wisdom in Dr. Seuss. Tim?
I think three things for me, and I'm going to share a couple of examples, but one is, like Andy said, I think you have to lead by example. When you're in charge of residents, or especially fellows, and it used to just irritate me that when the fellows would come and they weren't prepared to do the case. And so if they didn't do the case, I'd say, guess what, let's try harder next time. I'd do the case. And it just drives them crazy, to sit there and assist you, doing an ankle fracture. And so I think leading by example and having expectations that they should try to model their behavior after you. Another area that I really learned during my presidency, and I'll talk a little bit more about it, is learning how to appropriately empower other people to do jobs that you know that you can do better. So when you walk into a room or you are a committee chairman and you think, it's driving me crazy, I can do this, but you need to somehow be able to teach them and show them how to do the job so that they can pass that on, teach one, show one, on and on and on. And then the third thing, and I'll have an example of this a little bit later, is empathy. I think you need to be able to have somebody come into your office and close the door, turn off your phone and look them in the eye and listen to what they want to talk to you about. Be empathetic and be open to what their concerns are. You may think that it's not a very big problem. It may not be something that is in your heart, but to them it's important. And I think that you have to learn how to see and visualize something that's important in somebody else.
Thanks, Tim. And Steve, you've had leadership positions in your hospital too, and what do you think?
Well, I agree with everything that's been said. I think at a hospital level, it's often important to recognize the different power structures going on. There's a nursing power structure, and there's an ancillary staff power structure, and there's an administrative power structure. And as you interface with all those different people, you have to sort of understand where they're coming from and how we can all work together. So that idea of being inspirational, saying this is the goal, this is where we're trying to get to, and how can we help, is, I think, oftentimes very helpful. And I think just following up with individual conversations about various topics and just making sure that trying to understand, not that anybody's actively undermining you, but they often have agendas that are different, and they're trying to make something happen that may or may not move you towards your future goal, as you said. So I think a lot of time spent in just understanding. At the OTA, it was kind of interesting because I led at a time when the organization was doing pretty well. So then you have to go out and look and try to find some things that might need some improvement or some things that might need some benefits. One example for me was when I was there, I asked, to your point, Tim, empowering other people, I asked some folks on the education committee to make a resident talk about how to do research, and they all kind of scratched their head and looked at me. But if you go to the OTA today, you'll see there's not one, there's four. And they did a far better job than I would have ever done. But they took the concept and listened and moved it forward in a way that I couldn't have done, but it was just fabulous.
Yeah, when I think about leadership, I think about, taking on a leadership role within an organization, and you sort of come into the organization, as Steve has said, and look around and see what should be done. But I think you have to sit down with the other leaders that are with you at the time and decide, what your plan is, not for your year, but for the next 3 or 4 years, and how to make that happen. And the only way to do that is to sit down with the other leaders and discuss it and make a plan as to how you think that might come about, and so that you can start that going the year you come in and get that going the year you're there, and also have it proceed on with other leaders, keep it going. So I think that in the organizations that I've been involved with, by making a 3 or 5 year plan, it's been really good to see it all happen over that period of time, and it's been consistent, as opposed to taking it for a year and going this way and someone else going the other way for another year. So I think it's really good to sit down with your colleagues that are in the same leadership line and get a plan for the next few years. It's really worked out very well for me and for the people around me. So.
It's interesting to hear Steve say when he was president of the OTA, things were going pretty well, and they were, and he had to look for areas of improvement. He was proactive in that regard, which is great. I was president of the OTA during the COVID year, so I didn't have to look for areas of improvement. They hit me right in the face, basically. So I was the president who had to cancel the annual meeting of the OTA.
So you're ground zero?
Yeah,
for
ground
COVID?
zero, that's right.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying that.
So it was all my fault. And so that, when you're a leader and things really go south, and it went south that year for sure, as we all know, that's when it really becomes apparent whether you have the qualities to do the job or not, I think. And it's just like if you're on a hockey team and you're winning every game, hey, it's easy to be the coach. Just, hey, go on the ice. When you're losing at a bad losing streak and the players are hating each other and practice is agony, that's when a real leader has to come to the fore, and I think that's the opportunity to really show that you can do that. And it was a difficult time. It brought out the best in people, and it absolutely brought out the worst in other people. There were people who were saying, if you have that meeting and anyone dies, it's on your head, kind of thing, at calls, and it was a very difficult time. But I think that we made some good solutions. We transitioned to we decided to cancel a meeting. We transitioned to an online meeting. We tried to make up for some things that we lost in the next year's meeting, et cetera. With the consensus of the group, we used as much scientific information as possible. We had a number of different people, both in Nashville, where we were supposed to have the meeting, and looking at daily positivity rates. Was this going to be feasible or not? Who could go to the meeting? Who had a travel ban at the university? A lot of people had travel bans. Hey, I'd like to come. My university will not let me go to this meeting, et cetera. So it was a real eye-opener, that particular thing. And I will, do people want to hear one funny story about COVID?
Sure. I'm going to ask you for another funny story later, too.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I was in Toronto when SARS hit. That was 2002, I think. So SARS was a very similar COVID-type virus. It came from China. People came back from China to Toronto with SARS on the plane. People in Toronto got sick. It had a 15%.
So you're ground zero again.
Ground zero again. There's a common theme here. There's a 15% mortality rate. And Toronto was really devastated by SARS. Like, our hospital basically shut down at one point. And so I had a lot of experience with what happened. So when COVID hit, we're in February of 2020. We had the big executive meeting at my hospital, and someone said, "Oh, there's this virus that people are talking about," and the majority of the people in the room said, "No, it's just like a bad flu. It's it'll come and go. Won't really be a big deal." And I sort of put up my hand and said, "I think this might be a big deal, actually, because I was in Toronto when SARS hit, and I think this is going to be really bad. And I think we're going to have a lot of people in respirators. I think we're all going to have to wear masks. You're going to be checked for everyone's going to come into the hospital in one door and be checked for temperature and screened, and it's going to really mess up our elective practice." And as I was talking like this, you could see the medical guy and the infectious disease guy and all the people around the table looking at me like, "Who is this bone doctor talking about this stuff?" It was, a complete idiot. And so then and I said, there'll be no sports, it'll all be canceled. And 2 weeks later, the NBA canceled their season. Right? Literally, when that thing out, people were calling me on the phone saying, "Mike, what's going to happen next? Like, what's the stock market going to do? And what should I do here? And should we buy masks right now?" And all this kind of stuff. So it was kind of funny. But that was a very, very difficult year for all of us, for sure. And that's when leadership really came to the fore, I thought.
So you invested in gold.
Right away. I ran out and bought a whole bunch of gold right away. Exactly.
Yeah.
If you want investment strategy, watch very carefully what I do. Do the exact opposite. You work out well, I think, long term. So.
Well, so that brings up the second question that I had for the group, and that is, having had to lead a group like the OTA, which is full of personalities, it is all your peers, and so it's intimidating in many ways, and you learn as you're experiencing it. What's something that you've learned from that experience that you now apply in your daily life?
I think that for being leader of a group is, on occasion, you're going to have to put aside what you think are your best interests for the best interest of the group, and that's what true leadership is about. So it may not be the right thing for you, like it was crushing for me, frankly, to cancel the annual meeting, because that was, my meeting that year, but it was for the betterment of the group. I was actually willing to forge ahead, but I thought if we have a super spreader event or someone dies at the meeting, it's going to be disastrous for our group, and I'm going to make the final decision to cancel a meeting. So I think that as a leader, putting your best interests aside for the interests of the group you're leading is something that I learned at that time, and I've tried to stick with going forward.
Thanks. So let's go back this way, Ross. What did you take away from that experience that helps you today?
Similar to Mike, but in a different way. Sort of, it taught you how to bring the people that were thinking in your direction, together and to make a plan that's going to work for the organization, as Mike says. That you don't want to just do something that's going to be right for you, but make a plan that's going to work for the organization and bring it forward. And we use this at the Canadian Orthopedic Association as well. We had some events that happened that we had to bring things together, and I think a comment that was made was that whatever you did, you did for the right of the organization, not just for what was going to be good for Halifax or good for Toronto or good for whatever. So you had to make it for the whole country and make it work for people in general. So I think that's what you try and pull together is a bunch of people that are like-minded, and you can get at a table and get things done that are reasonable for the whole organization. Yeah.
Thanks. Steve?
Yeah, as I think about that, I can think of a couple things. During the time you're on the presidential line, there comes a time when you're asked to help participate in the formulation of a future strategic plan. And one of the things we talked about in my year, we started the beginning of a conversation about registries. And part of that was that in the very beginning of the OTA, if you go back to the history of it, I think in year 2 or year 3, there was the beginning of a trauma registry that was developed. And it was a wonderful idea at first, but it just never panned out to what we wanted it to be. And so part of that discussion was, do you let this go to do something else? And that was a hard discussion to work through, but I think it was an important one. And honestly, there's still a lot of work going on in that area. It's not done by any means, but it continues to move forward. But I think sometimes being willing to, the idea is, the first part about making a better decision is stop making a poor decision and going forward.
Well, I was fortunate enough to be the president during the Haitian crisis. So in January of 2010, there was a magnitude 7 earthquake that hit Port-au-Prince and immediately killed 222,000 people. 500,000 people were injured. Within 1 year, there was 3.5 million people living in tents. It was a disaster beyond imagination. And we had a couple of OTA members at the time, Mike Bossy and Andy Pollock, who were connected to the Department of Defense. And Mike was, I think, retired admiral at the time. And so phone calls with the Academy, with Washington, and it was just overwhelming to me, I grew up in San Diego on a beach, and all of a sudden now I'm trying to deal with this Haitian crisis. So it really taught me that, gosh, you need to learn how to rely and empower other people. That's why I said that empowerment of other people. And even in my life today, I mean, to try to teach your grandkids how to play chess or to teach them how to swim, to empower them to be better and to help out for the better good, as Steve said. I think that's, in my opinion, a real quality of a good leader.
So how do you focus on that for your junior partners, then, empowering them? And
yeah, I think leading by example. Gosh, I'm pretty senior now, and You know, the idea of getting up at night and examining people in the emergency room, it doesn't happen so much anymore. You know, and you know, we have very capable physician assistants and nurse practitioners, and so, you know, the skills that you were taught and kind of the qualities that you think empower you as a good physician, you know, might not spill over into the generation that we have today. But I still think, like I said in my talk, that I think you have to be capable. I think you have to be kind to people and work hard. And I think that those are really good qualities. And I always teach the fellows, I said, the way to be successful in life is, number one, be nice to people, and number two, work hard. Everything else will find its way.
Thank you. Andy?
So there's a big difference between leading a large organization and then, leading your team at home, your department, those sort of things. But I think when you think about it, it's an issue of scale, but it's the same sort of thing. You have the big personalities, no matter what group you're in. An organization like the OTA has a strategic plan, and you spend a lot of time working on that. And as the leader for a year, you don't want to be creating huge swings in the course. You want to kind of stay the course. But at the same time, you want to prepare the organization to be ready for, to be resilient and ready for unexpected things, kind of what you got at it in the introduction. You've got the default future and the intended future, and you don't know what's around the corner. And that's true no matter what level you're leading at. I think I've realized that you're a leader in everything you do in a hospital. When you're a surgeon, you're in the OR, you can't do surgery by yourself. You have to have a team that's helpful. And in the hospital, we don't have that same kind of team that we used to have. It seems like every week I'm suddenly in the OR with people I've never met before, and that's a challenge. And fortunately, the large organizations don't face that same challenge, but they exist in an external world that keeps on changing. But that's one thing that I've really been interested in, is how you prepare yourself to they talk about luck, I forget the exact phrase, but luck is being in the right place at the right time, but it's also being prepared to take advantage of those opportunities. And so I think whatever level you're at, preparing your organization, preparing your department, preparing yourself to be able to take advantage of those things, even to see those opportunities is something that's important at every level.
Yeah, you can't control the crises that happen, but you can control your response. And so I would even go far as say it's not luck, it's like that part's a skill to be able to, and that's what we have to collectively develop. Thank you. And so Steve, I'll start with you with the next question, and that is, can you tell us about a learning example that you had, a crisis that you had to deal with in any facet of your professional career that you executed, that you had to address, and what was it that you did well in that, and what was it that you could have done better? And so how did you learn from that particular significant crisis that you were exposed to and you had to deal with?
I would say so. For a while, about 10 years ago, I was chief medical officer of Duke University Hospital, and I wasn't ground zero like Mike was for so many things, but I was the guy who had to institute universal protocol in our operating room. And as you remember, way back when, before we did timeouts and before we did checklists and before we did all that, those things were not seen as particularly helpful or advantageous to many surgeons, I would say. And so that it's fair to say there was a fair amount of resistance. So we basically, I think what we did well was to have a team of people, physician, nurses, administrators, who would review together the goals that the Joint Commission and the various other organizations had put out for us that we had to address and had to step forward and do those things. And then, so the things that we probably did well was to communicate clearly and crisply. The thing we probably didn't do as well was just to listen to enough people to understand the concerns and problems and things that we could have done better. We got it smoothed out and we got it implemented and it worked, but it took an effort, and I would say persistence personally, for me as an individual, I'm a bit of an introvert. I recharge by myself, not with a whole bunch of people. And so you find yourself in a situation where you just have to be with all kinds of people all the time. And that can be just mentally fatiguing if that's not something you enjoy. And so just being willing to put in the effort and put in the time to implement something that has to be done, I would say that's what I would say.
Thank you. That's good. Ross?
Yeah, probably I got back to Nova Scotia and set up a trauma organization back there. And so we started with nothing really. We had funeral cars picking up patients on the road, and we changed it to a helicopter system and a EHS system and everything, and everyone's going great. But in my enthusiasm, I thought we should evaluate every case, very well. And in retrospect, I would say don't do this as early as I did it. But so we had a visiting professor coming to town, and I thought we'd bring up this case that didn't go very well with resuscitation. And so this guy came in the room, and I presented the case, and everyone was in the audience, and the professor that was visiting said, well, this is a horrible thing, and this is the worst case of resuscitation I've ever seen in my life. At which point, the general surgeon who was involved in it jumped up and cursed this guy out in front of everybody. And the place went into a gong show, right? And I was kind of left holding the bag, and everyone else was very entertained. But the guy looked at me and said, this might have been a little early to review this. And I thought, I had the best interest at heart of the program, but it probably wasn't the right time to put this case forward. So I say review every case you have, but not really early. Like give it 6 months or so before you go at it.
Timing is everything. Mike?
I think the thing, and it's not a single event, but multiple events that I have done poorly in the past was recognizing early when someone was struggling. So be it a faculty member, a new hire, or a resident, when they weren't doing well, I would have had the tendency in the past to say, oh, we'll just keep plugging away here, we'll keep doing showing them how to do the right thing every day, and eventually they'll come around. And I think that I've been slow to respond and be proactive in that kind of setting. And usually things don't get better in that unless you do something. And so now, both my program director and I, with regards to residents in particular, we see someone struggling, we recognize it, intervene early, try and find out exactly what's going on, and figure out some kind of remedial course of action. And we all find everyone likes to take the good resident and groom him or her to be a superb surgeon. Everyone likes that. We all like that. But taking the struggling resident and trying to make them average or at least competent, that's what people don't do very well in our profession, I think. And certainly that's been my fault in the past. And I think that's something that we're trying to focus on now going forward. Be much more proactive and much more responsive. And I'll use the example of resident, but you could apply it to a faculty member or a researcher or whatever, and doing something about it early, even though it's not really most of our cup of tea to do something like that. We like to take a high-performing person and perfect them to the next Sir John Charnley, whereas taking the underperforming person and trying to bring them up to just some kind of semblance of competence is not something we all like to do much.
Just to follow up on that, not everyone's meant to be an orthopedic surgeon, let's say. And, we see a lot of students who go down this path before they know much about orthopedics, and maybe some of them would be better off on a different path, and they might realize that later on. So at what point do you think, if you see someone struggling, that we should suggest that maybe this isn't for them, but not making it so negative? Not you can live a fulfilling life without being an orthopedic surgeon, but it's just, how do you suggest that without making them feel like a failure?
Are you going somewhere with this? Is that what it is? Someone look at it.
No, I have students who haven't matched 3 years in a row, and they're still...
You looking at us when you're saying that?
It's too late for you guys, yeah.
I think it's too late.
So that's
You picked the wrong moment.
I don't know if anyone's seen it, but there's an exchange going back and forth. I think it's on the AOA website, and I think Bill Levine started about the questions you need to ask a medical student about whether they want to be an orthopedic surgeon. Do you see it, Jim?
I saw it on LinkedIn, actually. He posted it, yeah.
Can you give me the details? Because Bill Levine started, said you need to ask an aspiring student these 10 questions about whether you want to be an orthopedic surgeon or not. And it was an excellent little interchange back and forth, and people were adding things to it and saying this should be better, and it was a very illuminating thing. And I think that's a very reasonable thing these days. And it's not like the questions you would ask me, 30 years ago. They are new questions that are, do you want to work in a system where often you're not really valued very much? Do you want to work in a system that's going to make you do more than you want to do some days for less than you want in terms of recognition, et cetera, et cetera? You're willing to sacrifice for others on a regular basis, and not some esoteric thing, but concrete examples of it. It was a really good interchange. If people are interested, we should probably try and figure out what the reference is. So that's an excellent point. We had a resident a couple years ago who just clearly was not cut out for orthopedics, and we had to have that tough conversation with them. This is just not going to happen, and it's a very tough conversation to have. But you have to try and say, look, not everyone's right for this profession. Your skill set is different, and we wouldn't be good at something else, but you will be good at something else. You need to use this as a learning experience. But it's a hard conversation to have for sure. Was it the AOA? Was it?
Yeah, it was the AOA. I actually saw that, and it was in line with the conversation that you're having, and that is, what sort of questions you ask and what's the timing of it. And if you let it go on too long, it's people have bought on. You can't deviate. So, the comment that I think you said, Mike, start intervening early is really critical, and it's a sensitive issue. How do you tell people, it's not me, it's you? Yeah.
Intervention may not be that we're going to continue to work on making you a good orthopedic surgeon or at least a competent surgeon. Intervention might be, this is not for you. That might be the intervention. It's better to have that conversation when you're 3 months or 6 months into your first year than when you're an R4 struggling to get a fellowship or struggling to get out of the program, basically.
The problem is in today's world is that if you say that, if they don't agree with you, then you're in trouble. Like if they agree with you and they understand that they are not meant for this particular profession, then everything's fine. You can work out a detail. If they think they still are made for the profession and it's your fault they're not where they should be, if the teaching hasn't been good, the attention hasn't been good, then you're still in the same position. So how do you do a rehab for that program to get them to where they want to go?
So having been through this, there's some critical things there. Number one is that you have to document everything. So you document that conversation you have with the person, the resident, for example, and they say, you're not teaching me well. Okay, what are your problems that you're having? And we'll respond to that and try and make it better. We'll do that. Now, this part's on you. This is what you're not doing better, and we want you to, when you get called to the ED, go down there. Don't go down there 45 minutes later. Go down right away. And don't yell at the nurses in the ED. And a concrete conversation like that, and document it. This is your chance to improve. We're telling you what people are saying that need to be improved, and this is your chance. And we're going to listen to you and try and improve the things that you don't like. That's the initial thing. And then if it continues and you document over and over again, then you're on solid ground saying, we can't make this person any better. But just to yell at somebody and say, hey, you're doing a crappy job, we're going to fire you, that doesn't fly at all. You have to do it in a proper sequence, and those initial remedial steps are often quite effective in making someone better. And they didn't realize they were doing this thing.
But what if it's the anesthesiologist? You can do that, right? You can yell at them.
No, I just look very disappointed when they take a long time, and I think that has an effect.
Well, so this applies, for those people in the audience that aren't in teaching programs or supervising, this applies to every single employee that you might have working for you or working with you. And so that this is, the more and more of all of our jobs and the leadership jobs are now becoming HR jobs too. Andy, do you have a challenge that you learned something from?
Yeah, I was initially thinking along the same lines of the conversation we just had. One of my personal challenges, being somewhat introverted, is giving that feedback and dealing with those hard conversations quickly. But that is, I've learned in my leadership journey, that is the best time to have that hard conversation is when you realize you have to have it, because the longer you wait, just actually harder it gets, or then sometimes it never happens, and you've lost a big opportunity. I think one of the things that changed subject a little bit that I learned the most from was just a year and a half into COVID, when we were just kind of coming out of that. I had a personal health problem where I suddenly was going to have to step out of work for a while and deal with, and I learned a lot about that. First of all, my team just said, "We got you," like, we're good, and And they were. You know, I imagine it's like a military unit where the commander goes down, whatever, and then the next officer steps up and you're going. And it was actually it was amazing, but it was humbling in its own sense, because you know, I realized that you know the team was going to continue to function just as well with or without me. And that was a good learning lesson, and maybe feel good about what I'd done so far. But it also just kind of you realize that it's not all on you, and that was something important to learn.
But that's an excellent point. Like a mentor told me once, I asked him, you know, what do you think makes your program successful? And he said, one of the most important things about my program being successful is if I drop dead tomorrow, someone would pick it up and it would go on seamlessly. I'm not, like in the old days, I'm the critical person, everything has to go through me, I make all the decisions, and it stagnates your group because no one else has that capability. But a successful program, I think, in 2025, if something happened to you tomorrow where you weren't there anymore, would your program, you know, falter and die, or would someone pick it up and would it carry on as a group? And I think it's the latter thing that you really want to strive for. And shielding everybody else in the organization from any independence or decision-making is not the way to do it anymore. Like, frankly, the old school orthopedic chairman used to be like that. They were the man, and everything went through them. And when that didn't go well, or they became not very efficient or not very good, it was a terrible thing for the program. Whereas now, if you stepped out tomorrow unexpectedly, would your program continue on in your absence? And that's, I think, what you really want to strive for these days.
Great, thank you. Tim, last word on this one.
Sure. So I'm the most senior person here and rapidly approaching kind of the end of my career. And so...
but you're wearing the best jacket, by the way.
Yeah. That's how I wear it.
So best trust one.
But I'm kind of looking at this more personal now. And all of us up here are asked to do a lot of things. You're asked to be a surgeon, a researcher, a dad, to stay in shape, practice your religion, and be a good partner. You can't do all that, okay? And so for me personally, I didn't do very well with my research. You know, I think I let some of my projects go. I didn't get as much published as I wanted to. That's always bothered me quite a bit. And I haven't done very well with my religion. You know, everybody has excuses. My kids were athletes. I was on call. I mean, you can find all kinds of reasons not to practice your religion. Everybody does a really good job being a surgeon. I mean, that's what we do. And the kids, I think we all have a way to kind of figure out how to spend time with the kids, even if you just show up for 2 minutes, like, you know, a baseball player. So you do call, you do surgery, you run out to the baseball field and you wave at the kid, and then you go back home and he says, hey, yeah, God, did you see my hit? Oh, yeah, it was fantastic. No, you didn't see anything. But, you know, you showed up. So I think you should look at your career kind of towards the end and maybe begin to focus a little bit on some of the things that you didn't feel that you did as good a job in. So I think those are kind of the good and the bad of my career.
Yeah, and you said it before too, in terms of reflection and being able to pivot. Those are all, I think, really critical things. Introspection, and it takes a while. I mean, none of us wants to hear that we're doing something poorly.
Yeah, exactly.
But we aren't doing everything as good as we could, and that's the issue. Right. Every single person in the room is that way.
Yeah, especially if you get a little older, it becomes a little more important, you know.
Yeah. So last round of questions here, and so we'll start, Mike, and then we'll work back over. And so, funny anecdote, as being an OTA aside from COVID, and inviting me over as the visiting professor when there was SARS. Aside from that, now, is there any, what's a funny anecdote you had from your leadership experience with the OTA?
I'm going to have to think about that one a bit.
There's nothing funny.
There wasn't a lot of fun that year, buddy, I got to tell you. I think probably the funniest thing I had was I had an individual conversation with a previous president of the OTA who was a prominent member of the trauma world. We had a phone call about whether we were going to have the annual meeting or not, and he felt strongly we should, and at the time I felt strongly we should, and it became kind of a surreal conversation where we drifted off into various very theoretical things about plague and history and stuff. So I think that was probably the most amusing part of that whole year. Not very spectacular, but very amusing.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Ross. Anything funny happen?
Well, no, I don't know if it's
23 beers?
What's that? I was going to bring that up, actually.
Okay, all right.
It wasn't very, not an anecdote, but Ted and I were leading a group, and we were having a great time, and so we headed downtown. It was in Montreal?
Yeah.
Montreal, yeah. Anyway, so we're going down to this club, and we ended up with a bunch of people with us, and we looked back, and there was about 16 or 17 people with us. And so I went up to the bar, and the guy says, what do you want? I said, I want 23 beer. He says, why 23? He said, I don't know, it's a good number. So we got that, we drank it all, and about 2 seconds later, Ted goes up and he says, I'll have 23 more. So that was the deal for no matter what we order, or 23 beer or something all that night. So we had fun. But I said to Ted, this is how you lead. We just order 23 beer whenever we want to. That's part of the deal. And that's what he said, 23 beers.
True leadership right there.
Yeah. And then 23 for me and 1 for Ross. Steve.
Well, I remember, I don't know how funny it is, but I remember being at one of the leadership dinners, and I think Ross was a couple years ahead of me, and so he started this thing of giving toast, and so everybody's giving a toast. So it comes to me, and I'm giving a toast, and I'm terrible at giving toast. So I get up to give this toast, and I ended up, I think, offending half the room. But I got through it. Only a quarter. Only a quarter.
Oh, so mine is, Andy Pollock. You're on the committees, you're real active, and then you're on the board, and then you're the president, then you have a couple of years afterwards. And so I was done. That was like 10 or 12 years. It's time to go home and go to work. And so Pollock calls me up and says, hey, I'm going to be the Academy treasurer, I think it was. Yeah. He said, will you cover for me for 1 more year on the board? And I said, oh my God. I said, I'm going to kill myself. And so he said, well, I'll buy you a beer. So anyway, every time I see Andy Pollock, yeah, he said, hey, I'll buy you that beer. I said, that's never going to cover it.
Not going to cover it.
Right.
Andy.
Well, my funniest memory involves Ted. So there was a tradition of the outgoing president receiving some sort of a gift, and so Ted had the honor gave me my gift, which happened to be a jacket, like a running jacket that was embroidered, with my name and OTA president. But the embroiderer forgot the letter M in my last name, so Schmidt, comes out as shit. So I got a nice jacket that said Andrew Shit.
That was my funniest one, too. Yeah, right. We did not do that on purpose. Well, that's wonderful. So first of all, thank you all for your courageous leadership and your reflections here. I personally have learned something from each of you, and our specialties better off for having you all as having led the helm. So first of all, big round of applause for them, please. So thank you. We'll go ahead now and move on to the next session.